My name is Janet Pollack, and I'm at the AMAP Secretariat, the Secretariat of the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program, which is located in Tromsø, Norway. And this webinar is being held as part of the EU-PolarNet, in which AMAP is a partner. EU-PolarNet is the coordination and support action under the EU's Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Program. It has 25 partners, which represent all European and associated countries that are doing activities, research and activities in the Arctic. This webinar the main activities of the project are to coordinate European polar research, and that includes also with Antarctica, and to provide policy advice. This webinar is being held to support the aim of the EU-PolarNet to promote broader international cooperation in important policy areas. And in this case, it is the health and welfare of people living in the Arctic. So I would like to begin with, we'll begin with an overview of the activities of AMAP in international coordination and cooperation on human health in the Arctic. And this will be given by Cheryl Khoury from Health Canada, who's also co-lead of the AMAP Human Health and Assessment Working Group. Cheryl?
All right, thanks, Janet. Hi, everyone. It's great to be able to give a presentation on cooperation, and even better to be able to talk about the AMAP work that we've been doing over the past almost 25 years. So I'm just getting my screen ready. There we go. Okay, so on behalf of the Human Health Assessment Group, it's my pleasure to give you a brief overview of some of the work of the HHAG as part of AMAP and some of the cooperation that we've done on human health issues in the Arctic. AMAP is situated under Arctic Council. It's one of several groups, and within AMAP, there are several expert groups. So I've listed these here on the right, and obviously this is cause for collaboration in and of itself because we're one of many groups working on the monitoring and assessment program. The mandate of AMAP is to monitor and assess the status of Arctic regions with respect to pollution and climate change, also to document levels, trends, pathways, and processes, and effects on ecosystems and humans, as well as to propose action to reduce threats for consideration by decision makers. And AMAP is mandated to produce sound science-based policy relevant assessments and outreach materials to inform decision makers. So as you see, these are AMAP's guiding principles, and at the bottom, not because it's least important, but is cooperation and coordination. And so without collaboration, we couldn't achieve these guiding principles in our work. AMAP has been around for more than 25 years, and here you see listed at the top of the figure the years and photos of the human health assessment reports. And I think it's important to note that at the bottom, there's just a snippet of many of the other products produced by AMAP by other working groups. So AMAP's been working for a long time collaboratively to put together information on pollution and climate change in the Arctic. So why do we collaborate? There's lots of reasons why we collaborate, but I think these figures represent two of the most important reasons. The figure on the left showing ocean and air currents coming from the rest of the world into the Arctic. So pollution in the Arctic is not usually present because of sources in the Arctic. So how Arctic regions can work with the rest of the world to ensure a reduction in exposure to pollution needs to be done collaboratively because it's not limited to one region. And on the figure on the right, we see that when we think about human health on the Arctic, many times our assessments have in mind the question, is my food safe to eat? And answering that question isn't a question that only human health researchers can do. It needs to be done in collaboration with communities. It needs to be done in collaboration with a variety of different experts across environmental science fields. So collaboration is the only way that we can really get to answering the question that really matters at the end of the day around the ability of Arctic communities to eat the food and to feel comfortable and to understand the risks and benefits of eating that food with respect to contaminants. So I want to present over the next couple of slides just an overview of some of the reasons why these collaborations are important. So collaborations improve our ability to make comparisons. So AMAP is reliant on national monitoring programs as the foundation for our assessments. So we need to bring together information from 8 different national programs to be able to put them together into one central location to tell a story for the Arctic as a whole. All of the members of HHAG participate in ring tests or quality assurance and quality control so that we have confidence in the results that we are comparing so that we can put them, like you can see on the right, on a map and be confident that we're comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges. And also being able to collaborate and bring all of this information together allows us to report on long-term trends in Arctic populations. Collaborations also make it possible to address very complex issues. And here I highlight just one project. The ArcRIS project looked at impacts on health in the Arctic owing to climate-induced changes in contaminant cycling. And it should probably come as no surprise that this was multidisciplinary work that involved multiple experts from multiple countries and provided meaningful outcomes. And I've left the link here on this slide for anyone who's interested in really delving more into this very ambitious project. Collaborations also support international chemicals management. I think this is really important. The work that AMAP brings together helps to support the UN Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants, as well as the Minamata Convention on Mercury. And we can see on the right here a paper that the Human Health Assessment Group members came together to say, if we're going to have to assess the effectiveness of international actions on mercury, we should ensure that we have baseline levels of mercury to which to compare. And this was work that came together as part of this group. So currently, the Human Health Assessment Group, along with other AMAP expert groups, are addressing 4 cross-cutting issues. So we met in May to discuss these in Denmark in person, which is always important. And now we've broken away to form smaller groups to work on zoonoses, chemicals of emerging concern, PFAS, and biological effects of contaminants in wildlife and humans. And this collaboration is important because we're not working within our own individual expert groups to come up with our own conclusions, but we're trying to look at things much more holistically, which I think is important for being able to bring the best recommendations and results to decision makers. So in conclusion, the direct link between environment and health encourages, I think really necessitates collaboration and partnerships. And this could be between academia, government, communities, Indigenous organizations. And this is really the best way to approach holistically the issue of contaminants research. And so I'm really happy to have 3 colleagues here to give more detailed presentations on how these collaborations work, and I welcome their presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. That was a very good overview of what we do in AMAP, but also the importance of bringing together different people from different experts from different countries, different disciplines, and to be able to deal with the problems that we have in the Arctic in terms of human health. One important concept in protecting and enhancing human health is the holistic One Health approach, which was just mentioned briefly in the last slide. This will be described by our next speaker, Arja Rautio, who is on the Faculty of Medicine of the University of Oulu and also the University of the Arctic in Finland. Welcome, Arja.
So thank you very much, Janet, for the introduction. Great to be here. I put my presentation on. Yeah, can you see it now?
Yes.
Good, thank you. So I will talk about the need of the collaboration between the researchers, projects and networks for the more interdisciplinary research and also in the One Health concept and content. In figure One Health in the middle, joint health of the environment, wildlife, plants and humans. And I have identified some of the key elements which I will tell more today. Environment, especially permafrost thaw, contaminants in environmental issues, food, water, soil, and of course in humans, and also some words about the zoonotic and vector-borne diseases. I will also introduce some of the projects and results of them, like One Arctic, One Health, which is under the Sustainable Development Working Group, ARC-RISK, which was already mentioned by Cheryl, and it was coordinated by AMAP, and actually Janet was a coordinator. It ended 2014. And the ongoing project Nunatoruk, effect of the permafrost thaw on coastal communities and their adaptation. And ECD-MET, which is studying metabolic effects of endocrine disrupting chemicals, and it is part of the Eurion cluster of the 8 projects. A Nordic Center of Excellence project, CLINF, climate change effects on the epidemiology and infectious diseases, and the impacts on the Nordic societies. I will first introduce some results from the Nunatoruk project, which main focuses on first fluxes and organic matters released from the thawing permafrost. Secondly, risk of thawing to infrastructure, indigenous and local communities and people's health. And third, effect of permafrost thaw on global climate and economy. Where does the permafrost exist and what is happening to it during climate change and when the climate is warming? In the Arctic, there's around 7 million people, from which 1 million are indigenous, and from 7 million, 5 million are living in 1,162 settlements on permafrost. This calculation was done in 2017 and published by Ramash and colleagues. Here in the figure on the right, you can see that they are the darkest brown colors of the regions of continuous permafrost, and going to the lighter colors, discontinuous, isolated, and sporadic. Yellow dots show the inland settlements and blue coastal ones. The map on the right, there is estimated permafrost status in 2060, based on the climate-driven permafrost projections, that 42% of the permafrost settlements will become permanent free due to thawing. It means that around 3.3 million people are not anymore on permafrost, and those settlements are marked as black dots on the map. The chance of decrease in regions of permafrost is huge, and it's happening quickly. And it's needed to take into the consideration when settlements make their future plans. And of course, it has huge impacts to the health of the wildlife and humans, and of course, food and water security. Langer and co-workers recently published a paper about the contaminated sites in the Arctic. They identified altogether 4,500 industrial sites where potentially hazardous substances are actively used or stored in permafrost-dominated regions in the Arctic. Energy and agriculture, forestry, and other land use account for the largest proportion of the industrial sites, but 70% is unknown. There might be up to 20,000 of this type of the contaminant sites, but they are not marked in the map, only this 4,500. Industrial contaminants have been neglected in existing climate impact analysis, and they are very important risks, of course, locally and globally. Figure on the left is in Ilulissat in Greenland. The drinking water is taken from ice-rich permafrost. But when it melts during next 2 or 3 decades, there will be unfrozen saline permafrost, and there might be challenges to have a clean drinking water to the community. The maps on the right up, they are maps for environmental suitability for anthrax outbreaks in the Arctic. There was one outbreak around 8 years ago in Russia, and there are thousands of same kind of the places with buried reindeers which was killed by anthrax. The risk of outbreaks of anthrax and other microbiological infections is real when the climate is warming and permafrost is thawing. On the right down, there are estimations of mercury content in the soil. The 3 maps show mercury concentrations in different layers from 30 centimeters to 3 meters. And on the bottom, on the right side, there is a map of the total amount of the mercury. These are 2 figures from the EU-funded Arctic project. On the right side, there are effects of the climate change on the relative increase of PCB concentrations in the Arctic. Seawater in upper part of the figure. The timeline is 150 years, starting from 1950. In the toxicokinetic modeling, the extrapolated concentrations of PCB 153 based on the calculations on the worldwide production and use of the chemicals and levels found. The lower curves in the figure are extrapolated concentrations in pregnant Inuit women, 4 different birth cohorts starting from 1940 to 2040. It would be extremely important also include effects of the permafrost thaw and possible released contaminants to these models and estimations, and also have risk for the human and wildlife health. More about the mercury and permanent organic pollutants, POPs. The figure on the left is from the publication based off the AMAP mercury report. It shows that mercury levels in juvenile pilot whale meat marked red, color and oval. The mercury in human hair marked on black color, and it was followed from 1975 up to 2020. The levels have different directions. Human levels are decreasing based on the guidelines to population not to use pilot whales during pregnancy and breastfeeding. And 2008, there is a recommendation to cease consumption of pilot whale. The diets have changed also to the Western types so that the whales are not so much used anymore. Warming climate has already caused changes in animal species available. For example, in Western Greenland, the other whales than pilot whales have been disappearing, or their amount has been decreasing, and there might be a big risk to hunt and use more pilot whales. Figure on right shows that levels of POPs are decreasing during Norwegian cohort members in MISA 1 and MISA 2 cohorts. Sampling was done to 2009 and 2019. However, the concentration of short and medium chain chlorinated paraffins have increased. Paraffins are lubricants of the plastics, and they are endocrine disruptors. This result is from the Horizon EasyMed project. Zoonotic and infectious diseases are an important part important part of One Health, and more visible because of the COVID-19 pandemic. In the Sustainable Development Working Group's project, One Arctic, One Health has been running now more than 8 years, and it is led by US. The bibliometric review about wildlife infectious diseases since 1990, collected both in English language PubMed and Scopus and Russian language e-library. The review shows that there are very different infections which nationally are monitored. Russian language articles were around 1/3 of all, 352. Review is also one part of the results in the Nunatar project. On the right, there is one example from the Nordic Center of Excellence results, CLINF project. It shows that the incidence of different infectious diseases in humans are associated with different climate variables. For example, borreliosis and leptospirosis on the temperature and tick-borne encephalitis and pulmonavirus infection. The precipitation is most important. CLINF researchers have published a lot of papers, and they have also collected open data for researchers. Back to the Nunatar project, the topic of permafrost thaw and risk for human health. In the figure, mother and child in the middle, they need clean air, food, and drinking water, surrounded closely by chemicals, viruses, bacteria, animals, and plants. Important are also societal factors, politics, industries, and economy. The research topics of our health working package are pollution, zoonotic diseases, especially anthrax, health of wildlife and humans, and including self-estimated health and mental wellness. Here you can see the main human health results of the Nunatar project. We didn't work alone as a health group. We were connected to the whole social science group, which was also having a technology inside that. And of course, we are very happy to continue our work in the ILLU project. Permafrost thaw is not a direct risk for mental health or mental wellness or self-estimated health. In all these three places we were, in Ilulissat in Greenland, in Svalbard, Longyearbyen, and also the North Canada. And but there are indirect ones and risks, especially economic challenges. As conclusion, One Health approach is essential for the human health research in the Arctic. Same is with collaboration, interdisciplinary, co-production of knowledge, and holistic estimations for the future. And it is important to think about the whole living conditions, not only the human health as such. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to answer your questions. And of course, I want to thank my team here in Oulu and all over the partners and collaborators. Thank you.
Thank you, Arja, for this excellent overview of One Health and its application and in certain projects. And it also leads us into the next one, because you were describing impacts of climate change on permafrost thaw and how that may affect human health. Our next presentation will look at a broader basis on the new developments in terms of how climate change is stressing our health and well-being, with a particular focus on the Arctic. So I introduce Tiff-Annie Kenny, who is from the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Laval in Quebec, and Selina Wolke from Inuvialuit, Regional Food Security Coordinator in Canada. So please go forward.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon also, and perhaps even good evening. So today we'll be exploring the theme of climate change, health, and well-being within the context of the Arctic, a region that's obviously at the forefront of profound environmental transformations. So before going any further, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the brilliant and inspiring collaborators and community organizations with which Selena and I have the privilege of working on this and several other projects. For our discussion today, we've structured it around three main themes. First, we'll begin by discussing the interconnectedness of climate change and human health, emphasizing really that one ocean, one health perspective. From the broad, Selena, my co-presenter, will then shift to the specific, spotlighting her research and experience from the beautiful Inuvialuit hamlet of Politek to provide a more localized viewpoint on these overarching themes. And we'll conclude by discussing the critical role of collaborations and how integrated efforts across various scales, from community to international levels, can lead to meaningful impacts and solutions. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging the lands and people of Haida-Gwaii, from where I am addressing you today. It's a small island on the northwest coast of British Columbia. It's obviously a place steeped in history, culture, and ecological significance. And the mutual respect between people and place is a reminder, I think, of our shared responsibility, especially as we navigate the challenges of climate change, and a living testament to the dedicated stewardship of the Haida people. And just last week, when I was reflecting on this webinar on the theme of collaboration, I had the privilege of attending a community event to mark the opening of the local health center. And the spirit of unity and shared understanding and collaboration was really palpable, because Maori performers all the way from New Zealand had graced us with their performance and with their presence and with their song. And it was to honor the intertwined histories and fates of Indigenous people of the Pacific region, and all the rich tapestry and cultures and relationships that bind across great distance. And it was really a reminder that oceans don't divide us, they really connect. And that connection, that international unity, is really what's needed to address climate-related impacts on health. So climate change, as we're acutely aware, is not a singular phenomenon, but a constellation of cascading events, ranging from oceanographic perturbations to terrestrial upheavals, each with profound socio-environmental implications. But these environmental shifts aren't merely biophysical or ecological. I think to think of them as such is really climate reductionism is a term that I think is very appropriate, but they have direct and cascading impacts on human health. So as temperatures rise and weather patterns become unpredictable, we're seeing ripple effects on public health globally. And to comprehend the health implications, it's useful to think in structured frameworks. So climate change can act as a precursor, triggering environmental effects, which in turn can influence human health outcomes. And as Arja mentioned very well, this can manifest in both direct and indirect ways. And we know that climate change is predicted to be the greatest threat to human health and health equity of this century and probably the centuries to come. And a lot of those impacts are projected to be from the indirect consequences, not the direct. So for instance, if we consider the following sequence: as global temperatures ascend, regions experience intensified heat waves. The uptick in extreme heat can directly lead to a surge in heat-related illnesses. But again, while these immediate effects might seem intuitive, they represent just one facet of a broader spectrum of health implications. Climate-related disturbances can have far-reaching ramifications. Extreme weather events, often spectacular in their ferocity, can cause immediate harms like injuries and death, both directly through their impacts on infrastructure, but beyond the initial havoc, they can destabilize communities, alter the very fabric and dynamics of community life and economies, and creating fertile grounds for both immediate and latent health issues. So we might think of waterborne diseases, but also non-communicable diseases like cardiovascular health issues. And I always use this example of Hurricane Katrina because it's among the most studied, and it really stands as a pragmatic instance of this. So the storm's immediate devastations were tragic in their own right. It led to nearly 2,000 people who tragically lost their lives. Many people lost their homes, but it also heralded a series of long-lasting health and socioeconomic impacts. So subsequent research unveiled that 3, 10, and even 14 years after the storm that they were enduring, impacts. Many of them were associated to socioeconomic downturns, but other to PTSD and other mental health challenges, just to reinforce that the indirect outcomes of climate change may indeed eclipse their direct counterparts. So emerging from this labyrinth of health challenges, we might ask the question, how do we proceed? How do we prepare? And in many ways, I think the answer lies in the strength of unity and collaboration. So it's not just essential or ideal, but really essential. The magnitude of climate change demands global insights, diverse expertise, and unified action. And my experience as a co-author on the IPCC special report on the oceans and cryosphere was really a symbol of what can be achieved when experts from varied disciplines and geographies come together, when our collective intelligence is unified to address one of the greatest challenges of our time. And one of the profound realizations for me during this work was that we don't have oceans in the plural, but rather one singular connected ocean. And more than just a semantic distinction, for me, it was really a powerful metaphor to remind us that we really need to collaborate across regions, because the fate of the ocean is shared across the world and the interdependence of those global ecosystems. Yet, even when the global community rallies, there are realms where our collective knowledge falls short. So this is the table from the IPCC, which really elucidates glaring gaps in our understanding at the intersection of health and climatic adaptations, and it really underscores the need for more rigorous collaborative inquiry. The European, through its Seas, Oceans, and Public Health Initiative, exemplifies how regions can spearhead efforts to bridge gaps. And I think it's really a positive example of what can be achieved when research, policy, and action are leveraged across disciplines and sectors. In Canada, our relationship at the nexus of oceans and human health remains in its nascent stage. But one of the significant things that emerged, and it's quite small on the screen, but we can see that in the 1990s, the International Year of the Ocean was really a cascading event that led to several national and international initiatives to unite oceans and human health. So the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development holds a lot of promise when it comes to advancing that knowledge. But when we look at numbers at an international scale, like this figure from the IPCC report of how much fish contributes to animal source foods and how climate change may impact fisheries catches over the next century, it's essential to recognize the risk of averaging out critical disparities. National statistics might suggest one narrative, but within a nation, specific communities can have vastly different realities. And such is obviously the case with Indigenous coastal communities who consume several fold more seafood than a national average. And so if climate change affects marine ecosystems, then it's these communities that will feel the brunt of it and feel it first. So within the broader picture of ocean health, climate change, and food security, I think this call from the high-level panel of experts really to engage in inclusive dialogue and to build scenarios to understand the impact of climate change on food security and nutrition among the most vulnerable zones, and to implement necessary actions towards that end. So on that, I'm going to shift it over to Selena, who will talk about some of the work that has been happening in her community and some of the observations that she's noted.
Good morning, everyone. As I mentioned, my name is Selena Worlke. I currently reside in Pollock, Northwest Territories, Canada. We're a coastal community with about 400 plus people. My community was established in about 1987, and we have few members that were part of our invalid final agreement with who has fought to protect our oceans. So currently we have a marine protected area which protects several marine animals, and it was established in 2016. And we are a flying community. I'm a local harvester, and I also fight for human rights, mainly for food security and food sovereignty. And since 2014, I've been involved with local food programs, and I currently am working with Country Foods for Good Health, Canmore, and Food Costing with 3 different universities. I also work with Nutrition North Canada, which is a government-funded program that has 2 programs. One is the Northern Subsidy to subsidize perishable foods, and the other is a cooking program. The local, and I also work with the local housing food programs. I have also a background in climate change research in our community, which was held by our regional office of Innu Valley Regional Corporation. The cycle of food sovereignty begins with individuals that make up a network of collaboration against a cause that every life has encountered, food insecurity. To be able to work towards food equality, it starts with research, with what resources are out there to assist the people. My people's culture is sharing of their food, of their materials in life, because they all have experienced food insecurity at one point or another. The impacts of food insecurity has causes and effects from diabetes, depression, violence, confidence, mental wellness. We all use our traditional knowledge and expertise of researchers to work together to adapt to climate change and its health impacts, making a sustainable foundation that will work for everybody. Our adaptability to the current situation, climate change, and the health and wellness affects the importance of food sovereignty. The collaboration of communities is the ultimate key to adapting. We have to deal with the land changing, also the environmental toxins that is released, the people's illnesses that come from an array of effects of climate change, the health and safety risks of our harvesters from the vast changes in land formation, the migratory changes in land, sea, and air animals, the contaminants that the animals have and are consumed by locals. This is where local governance and research is needed to help us adjust to and learn new ways to accept the change. Our local food market is at an all-time high and low quality and high cost. So we also have harvest our food to offset the cost of living. Our communities in the Innu Valley settlement region share our country food, and we also keep each other informed of programs that will benefit for the well-being of each individual. The people that lived in northern Canada have been adapting to climate change right from the beginning, as depicted in the pictures. The first picture is my community in the 1980s, and outlined it shows where we have lost the land mass. We have lost about 15 feet of land since then, and it's all along the shoreline. The next pictures there are our shorelines and our local harvesting areas. The health and well-being of people that live in these areas have a long road. Reason being is what's there today might not be there tomorrow, and how we will adapt to tomorrow. The shoreline erosion during the summer, the heat is absorbed into the land, and melts the exposed permafrost in our land, which decreases the strength of the land, and then therefore it erodes. In the last few years, it has been harder for the scheduled barge supplies to make it safely to our shores, with global warming showing its face more aggressively every year. The weather and ice have affected the routes, and it was too unsafe for workers. And on the year the barge could not make it to the few communities, this had a ripple effect in businesses, families, and everybody's health. After talks with local and federal government, they agreed that there will be subsidies added to supplies, and that's what I mentioned through nutrition or subsidies, but this was an extra subsidy that should have helped local communities. By this, but no one took into the account the greed for the Northwest companies. Just like with nutrition or subsidy, they took advantage of this, and for the people that do not study food costs or may make daily purchases like I do with all my programs, which I'm mainly in the stores almost every day, purchasing food for my cooking programs. So I noticed this trend. We're already used to paying the high cost of food, but we're not adapted to it. We have no choice in the matter. Nutrition North is a government-funded program that does help, but again, they don't know the choices that the Northwest Company makes in these matters. Food security was already an issue to the flying communities, and because of the delays in the food deliveries, it has a big effect on health and mental wellness for families, for example, with anxiety, depression, and not knowing where your next meal comes from. I have worked in the food industry since 2014 and also have been involved with climate change research. We have adapted to the changes to our land, and we're still adapting to the rising cost of market foods. My community has the highest cost of living in the Inuvialuit settlement region and the NWT, Northwest Territories. We deal with poor quality foods, high costs, and shortage of supplies, mainly due to weather changes, closed roads, no flights. Through collaboration between the universities, local researchers, and local organizations, we have been working on food security, making it a top priority. When anyone talks about the communities in the North, especially, with everything that we have to adapt to, food inequality shouldn't be one of them.
Thank you so much, Selena. And I think on that, just in the interest of time, I'll wrap up really quickly, but just wanted to say a few words quickly on that importance of collaboration. Often climate change is happening so quickly that as researchers, we're trying to, we're reacting to it as opposed to being proactive. And so the case study that we're doing on the Arctic barge cancellation is only happening now, several years after it's already impacted communities, but already very little of that had been documented. And just to, emphasize that importance of, uniting researchers, communities, and practitioners so that we have indicators that are relevant to Indigenous health so that we're not biomedicalizing the impacts of climate change on health and have indicators that are relevant for communities. And obviously, also as an opportunity to share and leverage local initiatives and local solutions. So like country food markets in Greenland and innovations like the Inuvialuit Food Processing Unit. And on that, I will leave it to Selena to say the final word.
Sorry about that. This word is Inuit Inusinit. It means our people. And I chose this word to end it because it doesn't only cover my culture, it covers everybody. Because we are all in the same battle for climate change, food insecurity, food sovereignty, and working together with all the amazing people on the panel, we should come to a good outcome.
Thank you very much, Tiff-Annie and Selena. It was a very interesting presentation to really show how climate change is impacting us generally, but particularly in that community in northern Canada. So on our final talk today, we'll look at another factor affecting our health, and that is the thousands of chemicals to which we are exposed in our daily life. So I'd like to introduce Katrin Vorkamp from the Department of Environmental Science at Aarhus University in Roskilde in Denmark, and the co-lead of the AMAP expert group on persistent organic pollutants. Katrin.
Thank you for the introduction, Janet, and for the invitation to this webinar. I hope that you can all see my slide and hear me all right. So I will talk about human exposure to chemicals of emerging Arctic concern. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge my team at Aarhus University working with Arctic pollution. And as Janet just mentioned, I also have the privilege of co-leading the expert group on persistent organic pollutants under AMAP, together with Derek Meir from Environment and Climate Change Canada, and Cynthia DeWitt from Stockholm University in Sweden. And currently, Roland Kallenborn from NMBU in Norway has joined our team as well. This AMAP network is a great source of inspiration and a real success story in terms of international collaboration. Most of my work in the Arctic is funded by the Danish Environmental Protection Agency. In this presentation, I will also talk about PARC, a partnership under the Horizon Europe Research and Innovation Program. We have already heard about POPs that Arctic populations are exposed to. Currently, there are about 30 POPs, depending a bit on how they are counted. And of course, this is a drop in the ocean compared to the number of chemicals on the market. So obviously, there are chemicals that we have not looked for yet. There are replacement of banned chemicals, and we wonder if they might have similar properties to those chemicals that were banned in the first place. There are also locally used and emitted chemicals. Do they also affect environmental and human health, in addition to the chemicals that are transported over long distances? All these other compounds that are not POPs are summarized as chemicals of emerging Arctic concern. So with this term, we mean compounds of concern in the Arctic that are not regulated under the Stockholm Convention. In the POP group, we compiled the data on these CACs, the chemicals of emerging Arctic concern, in an AMAP assessment report in 2016. And this included, for example, current use flame retardants and unregulated PFAS, that is per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, phthalates, siloxanes, pharmaceuticals and personal care products, but also well-known toxic compounds such as PAHs and many others. In our most recent assessment in the POP group, we analyzed the influence of climate change on POPs and chemicals of emerging Arctic concern. So we are beginning to get a better understanding of some of these CACs in the Arctic environment. But what do we know about the human exposure to these compounds in the Arctic? Shortly after the CAC report was published, AMAP started a cross-cutting initiative that has brought together experts from different groups. The Human Health Assessment Group, the Cheryl leads, the POP expert group, the Mercury expert group, but also additional experts from outside of AMAP. Cheryl has mentioned this initiative as well. So together, we are currently working on these 4 cross-cutting topics where our expertise needs to be integrated. So I'm in charge on a review of the human exposure to CACs. Then there will be a review on effects on wildlife and humans that my colleague Eva Bonefeld-Jørgensen leads. A review on zoonosis led by Christian Sonne, and a PFAS case study led by Paul Bayer from the Faroe Islands. With regard to the human exposure to CACs, we are analyzing existing knowledge of these exposure sources and pathways. So food, drinking water, air, that's outside and also in the indoor environment. The indoor environment generally, dust is an important exposure pathway, and the direct contact to consumer products. We are also going to discuss the benefit of collaborations and combined approaches. I have picked PFNA as an example of our current knowledge. PFNA is short for perfluorononanoic acid. So that is one of the PFAS compounds. You can see the structure of this molecule here on the top of the slide. To the left, you see an example of our environmental monitoring in West Greenland. It shows concentrations of PFNA in ringed seals from the west coast of Greenland, and obviously these concentrations are increasing. To the right, you see data that Eva Bonefeld-Jørgensen's group have published on PFNA in human serum, also collected in West Greenland, in Nuuk, Sisimiut, and Ilulissat. So how does this exposure occur? How do we get from the environment to humans? This can be via food, drinking water, the indoor environment, or all three of them possibly. So this is what we are working on now. And from our present review of the literature, it seems that food is an important exposure pathway again. I mentioned the Horizon Europe project PARC, which stands for the Partnership for the Assessment of Risks from Chemicals. It is a 7-year project, which has now run for nearly a year and a half. It has about 200 partners from 28 countries and a total budget of roughly 400 million euro. Half of it is from the European Union and the other half from national funding. I have the honor of co-leading the environmental monitoring in PARC, together with Valeria Dulio from France. And we have currently 3 projects in this field under the PARC umbrella. So the first one on environmental monitoring of PFAS and endocrine disrupting compounds. Then a project on the prioritization of monitoring approaches. And then on human exposure to organic chemicals from non-food sources, with a special focus on the indoor environment. Very similarly to our cross-cutting work in AMAP, we would like to integrate environmental monitoring and human biomonitoring in PARC. We would like to follow harmful chemicals from their sources through the environment to an exposure of humans and ecosystems, and then link this with human biomonitoring. In October, we're going to have a workshop in PARC about this topic, the integration of human and environmental monitoring. A few words about how we detect these chemicals of emerging Arctic concern. Nowadays, we typically combine 3 different approaches. Our conventional chemical analysis target specific compounds that are analyzed with optimized methods. But in the last few years, we have used non-target and suspect screening approaches increasingly to identify unknown and suspected contaminants in a sample. These methods do usually not aim to quantify a compound, but just to identify its presence in a sample. And these techniques in analytical chemistry can also be combined with modeling approaches to identify potential new contaminants and, for example, to build a list of compounds for a suspect screening approach. We recently completed a non-target and suspect screening project where we analyzed different types of Arctic samples: air from Greenland and pilot whale liver and blubber, sea liver and blubber, also both from Greenland, and human serum from the Faroe Islands and from Greenland. We also plan to analyze water collected with positive samplers. This is this cage that you can see there in the slide. But unfortunately, these samplers were vandalized and lost. This project is a collaboration with Eva Bonefeld Jørgensen and Paul Weyer. In this heat map to the right, you can see a summary of the number of compounds that have been identified tentatively in the different samples. Of course, we also find a lot of the well-known POPs. And this actually provides a kind of validation and quality control because we know that they should be in the sample. But we also find indications of several other compounds that we do not usually monitor in this sample. These non-target and suspect screening techniques are still in an early phase, where the quality assurance and quality control is not as well established as it is for conventional POP analysis. An important contribution towards more standardization and harmonization was recently made by the Norman Network in terms of a published guideline on suspect and non-target screening in environmental monitoring. Norman is a network of reference laboratories, research centers, and related organizations for monitoring of emerging environmental substances. It has a strong focus on emerging compounds and techniques and how to include them in environmental monitoring. It started as an EU project, but now it is an independent network with participants from all over the world, and it's open for all who would be interested. To summarize, our Arctic monitoring has focused on few compounds so far, mainly POPs. New screening techniques can identify more, that we summarize as chemicals of emerging Arctic concern. We need interdisciplinary approaches to understand chemicals in the environment and their exposure to humans. And finally, we can all learn from each other in the networks and projects that we are involved in. The Arctic is not isolated from the rest of the world, as Tiff-Annie also pointed out, but it faces many of the same problems as we do in Europe or other parts of the world. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Katrin, for this excellent overview of the situation with these new and emerging chemicals. The question is, do we want to do a screenshot, Mario? Should we try that? There's only 3 questions in the question and answer session, and the question was whether we would like to have a picture of everybody.
Yeah, we can do that, but then everybody will need to turn on their cameras.
So please turn on your cameras, everyone, and we will get a picture of you all. It probably will take 2 or 3 different shots because we're nearly 100 people online.
Perfect. I only have 2 screens of people, so I think we are done.
Excellent, great. Okay, then we have the questions. The first question is from Avinash Kumar. Avinash Kumar Jain, which human diseases are commonly found in the Arctic region? Are you speaking of zoonoses? Arja, would you like to take that one, please?
So that I think that it was a very nice answer coming to your question, because you were asking, I think that, for example, tuberculosis is one of the issues which is very serious in many places if thinking about these infectious diseases. There are also others, and of course, when the climate is changing, some of those infections, they are climate sensitive, and so that it is also focusing on those, because they are coming some of those infectious diseases which are not so familiar or not so much in the Arctic. And also we have new species coming to the north, and the risk of zoonosis is bigger. So that the infectious diseases, if I remember correctly, every 5th is zoonotic based. But I think that there are, Tiff-Annie, if you want also to say if you have looked those more detailed, but I think that there are, of course, many of the same kind of diseases, heart diseases and other things which are in all over the world.
Yes, good. And then the next question, there was just a comment by Daniel Legacy about tuberculosis. Eva Kumar, you have a comment about the paraffins. Would you like to make that directly?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Janet, for giving me the opportunity to ask this question. So my question is to Arja, who showed one of the figures in her presentation, which had higher concentrations of MCCPs when there were 2 different years that are being compared, and the SCCPs are kind of decreasing, but the MCCPs are increasing. So can it be attributed to the substitution of SCCPs from the MCCPs, or can there be any other reasons for this?
I think that is the reason that they are going up. And I think that every time when we are banned or something is not used, something else is coming. I think that is the issue. But 10 years and so big difference. I think that it's something we need to also look the regions where are not so much pollution available, for example, in the
right
in Norway or Nordic countries.
Yeah, because like MCCPs are not yet banned and their use has been increased in the last decade. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe I can just add to that we do not know for sure, but the MCCPs might also be more bioaccumulative because they have longer chains than the short chain chlorinated paraffin, which might be broken down more easily.
Okay, thank you.
So I do not see any additional questions or comments. If that is the case, I wanted to thank you all very much. I thank, first of all, our presenters for their really excellent presentations, for all the efforts they put to bring this webinar together. I would like to thank the EU-PolarNet, the coordinators for their support for this webinar, and thank all of you for your participation. So thank you very much, and have a nice rest of the day.